Alright guys, today is February 26th, 2022, and there's a war going on right now in Ukraine. Russia invaded a couple of days ago, and right now we have a huge fog of war. There's a lot of information, misinformation coming out, and nobody's quite sure what's going on. But in this video I want to talk about how this war could affect the population of Ukraine. Now this is the current graph right here. So it starts in 1950 and it does a projection all the way up to 2099. Here we see the dotted red line showing you 2022 right now. At first glance, we can see a huge decrease in the population since 1990. So the population of Ukraine has dropped significantly, and this war could mean an even higher drop. So this is the projection right now, and this is not taking into account any war that's going on, and we've no idea how long this war will last. It could be over quickly, it could drag on for years and years. And if it does drag on, this projection could be actually a lot worse than what we're seeing now. And what we're seeing now is absolute disaster. The current population of Ukraine is 43.2 million. 43,284,747. Now look at what the population was in 1990. 51.5 million. So Ukraine has lost about 8 million people in the last 22 years. A staggering amount. So let's look at some dates here. By 2030, the population is expected to be 40.9 million. By 2050, 35.2 million. And then by the end of the century, 24.6 million. And this, as I said, doesn't take into account war. And we're seeing right now people fleeing Ukraine, trying to get into Poland. So this graph could actually be a lot worse. So I just want to show you real quickly the population of Syria, because as you know, we had the war in Syria, and the population of Syria in 2010 was 21.4 million, and then it dropped all the way down to 16.9 million in 2018. So it lost about 4.5 million people between 2010 and 2018. But as you can see now, the population is rising, and it's rising pretty rapidly. A lot of people are coming back to Syria, and their population is expected to increase by quite a bit up until the year 2076 roughly, and then it's expected to even out and then slowly decrease towards the end of the century. But imagine if you're a demographer in 2010 and you're looking at this graph. Look how it rises up steadily. Now, if there was no war in Syria, then this increase would have just kept going up. Way beyond like 30 million by 2022. But now the population is 19.4 million. So we can see how war has affected the Syrian population. Now it is recovering, but that's because the birth rates in Syria were pretty high. Look at this graph here. They were at about 3% before the war started. And now the growth rate is skyrocketing because people are coming back. But if you go to Ukraine, the population is already declining by a huge amount. So this graph here shows you the growth rate. This line here is 0%. So in 1990, it hit a growth rate of almost zero. And it's been going below zero since then. Minus 0.48% in 1995. And then in 2000, it was almost minus 1%. Now, it did increase a little bit here, but it's still in the negative. It's still at minus 0.39%. And now it's dropping again, and who knows what's going to happen with this war. It could drop substantially like Syria did. It could drop like that. But we can see that the drop is already happening. So the Ukrainian population, we could see a massive population decline. It's already projected. And with this war, it could get a lot worse. Now look at this. The population changed since January. They've already lost over 42,000 people this year in less than 2 months. And the net change per day is 741. We can see that births per day is outnumbered by deaths per day. 1,000 births a day, 1,800 deaths a day. And then we have migration. Net loss of 1 person every 2 minutes. So this is going into the past. And we can see in 1990, we can see it in the green. It had a small growth rate of 0.21%. And if we go back to the 50s, 1955, 1.42, 1.29, 1960. So a healthy growth rate here in the 50s and 60s. And it just gradually slows down. And between 1990 and 1995, it went from positive to negative. So by 1995, we see a decrease in the population, and it's just increasing ever since. By 2000, it's 0.83, 0.81, and like I said, it did improve a little bit by around 2010, 2015, and right now it's around 0.59% in the minus. But look at these numbers. In 1990, the population was 51.4 million. Now it's 43.192. A huge loss in population. So these numbers here may seem small enough, but when it's year by year, this is compounded. And that's why you have like 8 million people gone out of the population. Now look at the projections. It's all in the red. 2023, 0.61. Now, these numbers could be way higher because of this war. Instead of being 0.61, you could have 2.61 or even 3.61. You could have millions of people leaving the country like they did in Syria. So let's look at Syria. Look what happened. The growth rate here in the 60s all the way through to 2010 is 3.4, 3.5%. It dropped to just under 3%, but then it went back up. And look at this drop here in 2015, minus 3.37. So we could see a similar figure for Ukraine, minus 2.12% in 2017. And then by 2018, it's just under 1%. And then by 2019, it's into the green again. And we're seeing huge growth rates again in Syria. Now, this is mostly because people are returning to Syria, but also the fertility rate has improved again. So what are the fertility rates? For Ukraine, it's 1.3, which is really low. Now, there are some countries that are even worse than this, but 1.3, you need to be at 2.1 to get to a replacement rate. So if it's under 2.1, it means the population will decrease. And that's before you consider immigration from the country. And there's a lot of immigration from Ukraine to other countries, especially Western European countries. And Syria, on the other hand, they have a fertility rate of 2.8. Now that's expected to decrease, but this is why Syria's population, part of the reason why Syria's population is recovering is because it's got a pretty healthy birth rate, and add to that the fact that a lot of Syrians are returning. So we're seeing a big bounce back in the Syrian population. So look at that, 2010, 21.4 million, and then it is expected to be 21.9 million by 2024. So by 2024, the population is expected to be higher than it was at the peak in 2010. So this is the current population pyramid for Ukraine, and you can see how unhealthy it is. We see a huge number of people in their 30s here, and we see a massive drop off, and then people in their 20s, like 18-year-olds, is a very small number of 18-year-olds, 19, 20-year-olds compared to people in their like mid-30s. And so when these people retire, you're going to have a huge problem in Ukraine because you won't have enough young people to provide the tax base. And we see here about 10 years ago it improved a little bit, but we can see it's going back down again. So we have a very unhealthy pyramid here, and in 30 years we're going to have disaster. So by around 2050, disaster is going to strike. And again, this doesn't take into account this war is happening now. And the number of people aged between like 0 and 5 could plummet even further than this. It could be way worse than this. So Ukraine is heading for disaster, even if you discount this war and ignore it. But we'll see what happens with this war. And this graph, it's a disaster, guys. And like I said, this doesn't even take into account the war happening. And it could like absolutely plummet. I mean, you could be talking about a population close to 35 million within the next few years. It's expected to drop to 35 million by about 2050. That could happen well before 2030, depending on how this war turns out. And there's already indications that European countries are happy to take in Ukrainian refugees. And that's probably because Western European countries have similar graphs to this. And so they could do with a boost of refugees from Ukraine or wherever, and Ukraine could be absolutely destroyed by population decline and collapse. Because this is what it is. This isn't like a decline, a slow decline. This is what I would call collapse. You know, when your population is almost halved in 80 years, that meets the requirements of a collapse as far as I'm concerned. Alright guys, be sure to subscribe because I'm going to be talking about the war as things progress. And we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of other countries and their populations. And basically, it's the whole world. It's a disaster, guys. The second half of this century could be an absolute catastrophe, even before that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, comment, subscribe. See you guys later.